The city that once ruled the known world, the eternal beacon of civilization, culture, and conquest, lit up the night sky not in celebration, but in destruction. Its temples crackled in the flames. Its palaces collapsed. Gold was ripped from statues. Blood flowed through its ancient streets. And with each passing moment, another piece of an empire, once thought invincible, turned to ash. Imagine it, a city so proud, so mighty, that the world itself had once bowed before its legions. A place where emperors were worshipped as gods, and laws written in marble-shaped continents for centuries to come. Now, that same city screamed in horror as foreign boots marched through the heart of its sacred forum. Once, people whispered that all roads lead to Rome. Now, every road led to fire. But how could such a fall come to pass? How did an empire with unmatched wealth, military discipline, and an unbroken legacy of power collapse into chaos? Why did the final siege strike with such force? And who were the shadows that brought it about? This is not just a tale of war and ruin, it is the final breath of an ancient giant. The last stand of the world's greatest empire. A siege that would not just destroy Rome's buildings, but erase the illusion of its immortality. This is the story of the moment Rome burned and history changed forever. The Roman Empire is synonymous with greatness. It conjures images of marble temples, thunderous legions, mighty emperors, and sprawling roads that connected a world. From Britain to Mesopotamia, Rome's reach was unmatched. Its engineering genius, legal brilliance, and military dominance shaped civilization itself. For centuries, Rome stood as the undisputed power of the Western world. The phrase eternal city wasn't poetic exaggeration, it was prophecy. But empires are living things. They are born, they rise, and eventually, they fall. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was no longer the juggernaut it once was. Though its name still carried weight, the reality within its crumbling borders told a darker story. Economic instability festered. Civil wars fractured loyalty. A once disciplined army was increasingly dependent on mercenaries with wavering allegiance. And in the shadows of its glorious past, new powers' barbarian tribes grew bolder by the year. Rome itself, once the seat of emperors and center of all power, had become a vulnerable and symbolic target, while the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, evolved into a stronghold of Greek and Christian identity. The Western Empire became a puppet stage of short-lived emperors and corrupt senators. Political power drifted to Ravenna, but the prestige of Rome remained, and that prestige painted a target on its back. In this crumbling world, the Vandals emerged not just as marauders, but as an organized, tactically brilliant force under a single man, King Genseric. His name would soon echo through the ruins of Rome. This is not just the story of the sack of a city, it is a chronicle of decline, betrayal, hubris, and vengeance. It is a drama that unfolded over decades, as the empire that had once swallowed entire kingdoms with ease now struggled to feed its own people. The final siege of Rome, in 455 CE, was not the first assault on the city, nor the last event of the empire, but it was the most devastating, both symbolically and strategically. It marked the death knell of the Western Roman Empire. After this sack, Rome would never again rise as a seat of power. Its ruins would stand for centuries, not as signs of greatness, but as warnings. Let us now travel back to the fragile twilight of Roman power. Let us walk its streets, enter its palaces, and descend into the chaos that consumed the eternal city. Let us meet the emperors who failed, the generals who fled, and the foreign kings who delivered the final blow. The siege of 455 was more than an attack, it was the funeral of an empire. To understand why the final siege of Rome in 455 CE was so devastating, we must first travel back over a century to witness the gradual decay of an empire that once seemed indestructible. The seeds of Rome's destruction were not planted in a single year or by one barbarian king. They were sown over generations, by Rome itself. The crisis began in the 3rd century CE, often called the crisis of the 3rd century. In just 50 years, Rome cycled through over 25 emperors, many of whom rose and fell through bloody coups. The empire was racked by plague, economic collapse, internal rebellion, and endless border wars. The mighty legions that had once conquered the known world were now being used not to defend Rome's borders, but to fight other Roman armies for control of the throne. During this time, the empire's enemies observed, waited, and learned. Among these were the Germanic tribes to the north, the Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, and the Alemanni. Once dismissed as uncivilized, these groups adapted. They observed Roman military tactics, they understood Roman politics, and, crucially, they saw Rome's weakness. By the 4th century, Emperor Diocletian tried to halt the disintegration by dividing the empire into east and west. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its wealthy cities, more defensible borders, and strategic capital at Byzantium, later Constantinople, would prove to be more stable. The Western Empire, with Rome at its symbolic heart, began a slow bleed toward collapse. Enter the Visigoths. Under the leadership of Alaric I, the Visigoths, once Roman allies, turned against the empire after years of broken promises. mistreatment, and exploitation. They marched toward the heart of the empire, and in 410 CE, they did the unthinkable. They sacked the city of Rome. This was the first time in 800 years that the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign army. Though the Visigothic sack was restrained compared to what was to come, it shattered the illusion that Rome was untouchable. The rest of the empire and its enemies took note. In the wake of the sack, the Western Empire tried to recover, but its efforts were undermined by poor leadership, rapid turnover of emperors, and an inability to field a reliable army. Rome itself had become politically obsolete. The Western imperial court had moved to Ravenna, protected by swamps and marshlands. But the symbolism of Rome still loomed large, especially in the minds of those who had never forgotten Rome's past conquests, including the Vandals. In the early 5th century, the Vandals were one of many so-called barbarian tribes migrating through Europe. Their name, which would later become synonymous with senseless destruction, belied a much more organized and strategic people. Under their leader Genseric, who ruled for an astonishing 50 years, the Vandals became one of the most feared forces in the Mediterranean. Genseric was no brute. He was cunning, intelligent, and politically savvy. He understood the weaknesses of the Roman Empire better than most emperors did. He knew that Rome's wealth was not just in its land, but in its CIT's trade routes, its harbors, its control of North Africa. In 429 CE, Genseric led his people, including over 80,000 warriors and civilians, across the Strait of Gibraltar into Roman North Africa. The Romans, weakened by internal divisions and distracted by other invasions, could do little to stop them. By 439 CE, the Vandals had captured Carthage, the crown jewel of Rome's African provinces. With Carthage under his control, Genseric held the grain supply hostage. He now had a fleet, he had wealth, he had territory, and he had ambition. From North Africa, he began launching naval raids on Roman territories in the Mediterranean, slowly tightening a noose around the crumbling Western Empire. Rome knew it was in danger, but it could not act decisively. The Senate was weak. The emperors changed too often. The army was disorganized. Some generals were competent, like Idius, the so-called last of the Romans, but their successes were short-lived and often undermined by jealous rivals. In 451 CE, Idius achieved a major victory at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, halting Attila the Hun's advance into Gaul. But in a tragic turn of fate, Idius was murdered by Emperor Valentinian III in 454 CE, likely out of paranoia over Edis's rising popularity. It was one of the greatest political blunders in Roman history. The next year, Valentinian himself was assassinated, possibly by Edis's loyalists. With both the empire's last great general and its emperor dead, Rome was leaderless and exposed. Rome was now a capital in chaos. In the power vacuum left by the murders of Idius and Emperor Valentinian III, there was no clear successor. Into this uncertainty stepped a Roman nobleman named Petronius Maximus. A wealthy senator and former Praetorian prefect, Maximus used his fortune and influence to bribe and bully his way into the purple. He declared himself emperor in March 455 CE, but he lacked the legitimacy, the experience, and above all, the military support to defend the empire. Worse still, Maximus made a critical political mistake. He broke off a diplomatic betrothal that Valentinian had arranged between his daughter, Eudocia, and Huneric, the son of the Vandal king. Instead, Maximus forced Eudocia to marry his own son. To Genseric, this was not just an insult, it was a betrayal of a treaty, and it gave him all the justification he needed to act. Genseric, ever opportunistic, prepared his fleet. He set sail from Carthage toward Rome, with thousands of warriors and a burning grudge. The Western Roman Empire had no standing army to intercept him. It had no fleet to block him. And as his ships approached the Italian coast, panic gripped the Eternal City. Petronius Maximus, the self-declared emperor, proved utterly incapable of leadership. Rather than organize a defense or rally the city's remaining guards, he attempted to flee. As he tried to escape through the city streets, a mob outraged at his cowardice caught and killed him. His body was mutilated and cast into the Tiber River. Rome was leaderless once again. When Genseric's fleet arrived at the mouth of the Tiber River in early June of 455 CE, there were no legions to oppose him. There were no generals to challenge him. The gates of Rome did not open out of hospitality but out of fear. Pope Leo I, the same man who had famously persuaded Attila the Hun to turn back from Rome just 4 years earlier, met with Genseric at the city's gates. The pontiff pleaded for the city's inhabitants. He requested that Genseric refrain from murder and arson. Genseric, surprisingly, agreed at least in word. He would not burn the city. He would not slaughter its people, but he would take what he came for. And so, on June 2, 455 CE, the Vandals entered the Eternal City. What followed was not a single act of destruction, but 2 full weeks of methodical, thorough looting. Unlike Alaric's Visigoths, who had largely confined their sack to 3 days, Genseric's Vandals stayed for 14. They stripped the city of its wealth. Gold and silver were taken from temples, churches, palaces, and private homes. The imperial treasury was emptied. The temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, one of the holiest sites in Rome, was desecrated. Statues were toppled. Bronze was torn from monuments and melted down. Works of art, many of them centuries old, were carted off to Carthage as trophies. Among the greatest treasures stolen were the sacred objects brought to Rome centuries earlier from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem: menorahs, golden vessels, sacred scrolls. These had once been carried triumphantly by Emperor Titus and displayed in Rome's triumphal arches. Now, they left the city as spoils of defeat. The Vandals also took people. Nobles, aristocrats, and clergy were seized as hostages. The Empress Licinia Eudoxia, widow of Valentinian III, and her daughters were among them. They were taken to North Africa, prisoners of war, bargaining chips in Genseric's political game. Though fire was not used indiscriminately, destruction was widespread. Rome was gutted. Its psychological heart was shattered. For the citizens of Rome, the sack of 455 CE was not a story of armies clashing in glorious battle. It was a slow, excruciating descent into humiliation. There were no legions fighting valiantly at the gates, no last stand by noble defenders. There was only dread, collapse, and silence. The Vandals entered not with fanfare or thunderous charge, but like a poison creeping under the skin, inevitable, slow, and lethal. Those who lived through the sack described the horror in terms both physical and spiritual. The psychological weight of watching a city, once called eternal, reduced to a broken husk, cannot be overstated. Rome had not only lost its treasures, but its sense of meaning, its place in the world. For generations, Roman citizens had been raised with the belief that their city was invincible. From the poorest plebeian to the highest-ranking senator, there was comfort in the idea that no matter what happened elsewhere in the empire, Rome would stand. That myth was now burned away. Homes were torn open. Libraries were ransacked. Religious sites were violated. Priests knelt before armed raiders, trying to protect what few sacred artifacts remained. Some hid in catacombs, praying for divine intervention. Others tried to bribe the invaders, offering family heirlooms or hidden gold to spare their daughters and wives from enslavement. Often, it didn't work. In many neighborhoods, the sounds of daily Roman life, vendors calling in markets, chariots rolling down stone-paved roads, school teachers reciting Virgil, were replaced by the sounds of chains, weeping, and foreign voices barking orders. Entire families were marched through the streets, shackled, and loaded onto ships as slaves to be taken back to Africa. Nobles were stripped of their titles, their estates looted. Some took their own lives, unable to bear the indignity. Cultural devastation ran alongside the human tragedy. Rome's once renowned artistic legacies, statues, mosaics, frescoes, was plundered. Churches were emptied of gold. Ancient scrolls were taken or destroyed. Priceless pieces of literature and history vanished in the chaos, never to be recovered. Though Genseric's men were under orders not to burn the city wholesale, isolated fires still broke out. Palaces and public buildings were torched, either accidentally or deliberately. Rome, though not turned to complete ash, became a smoldering ruin. Amidst this destruction, Pope Leo I remained a pillar of calm. His intercession had prevented a wholesale massacre, but even he could not stop the moral rot now visible to every Roman. For many Christians, this event was deeply unsettling. Had God abandoned Rome? Was this divine punishment for centuries of decadence? Had the city of man finally exhausted its grace? Roman senators who survived the sack returned to a world that no longer respected their titles or their traditions. Political authority had already been eroding for decades, but now, it was practically non-existent. With its treasury emptied and its elite either dead, captured, or disgraced, the city's governance collapsed. Even the roads leading to and from the city, once maintained with unmatched Roman precision, began to decay. Rome was now a place of ghosts. In the years following the Vandal sack of 455 CE, Rome never recovered. Not just economically, not just militarily, but spiritually, culturally, and symbolically. It had been hollowed out. The empire's center of gravity had already shifted away from the city, and now even its myth of supremacy lay in ruins. The Vandals had not just looted gold, they had stolen Rome's soul. In the ashes of that humiliation, what remained of the Western Roman Empire stumbled forward like a wounded beast. Petronius Maximus had ruled for barely 2 months before being torn to pieces by a mob. His replacement of Itswas as a Gallic nobleman, installed by a Visigothic army, that alone spoke volumes. Rome no longer chose its leaders, it begged outsiders to fill the void. Avitus didn't last long. The people hated him, the army distrusted him, and the Senate had no respect for him. He was overthrown within a year. What followed was a chaotic succession of puppet emperors, some installed by the Roman military, others by barbarian warlords. None held real power. The true authority often rested with generals Magister Melitema, who commanded what was left of Rome's fragmented armies. Meanwhile, Genseric ruled with impunity in North Africa. His fleet roamed the Mediterranean like predators in open water, striking wherever resistance was weakest. Sicily, Sardinia, and southern Italy were plundered again and again. The grain supply, once shipped steadily from Carthage to feed Rome's swelling population, was now cut off. Famine gripped the city. Starvation was followed by disease. The population plummeted. Once over 1 million strong, Rome's numbers dwindled into the tens of thousands. By 476 CE, just 21 years after the sack, a man named Romulus Augustulus was placed on the throne. He was a mere boy, not even a teenager. His father, Orestes, was the real power behind the curtain, but their reign would not last. In a final symbolic death rattle, a Germanic general named Odoacer marched into Italy, defeated Orestes, and deposed the young emperor. Romulus Augustulus was sent into exile. No bloodbath, no grand final stand, just a quiet removal, like the snuffing out of a candle. The Western Roman Empire had ended not with an explosion, but with a murmur, and no one marched to restore it. The Eastern Roman Empire, now what we call the Byzantine Empire, still considered itself the true heir of Rome, and it would persist for nearly another 1,000 years. But in the West, Rome was gone, not just as a capital, but as a concept. What was once the foundation of Western civilization had now become a collection of ruins, inhabited by peasants, haunted by memories. No new temples would be built. No new roads would stretch to distant provinces. No emperor would raise his sword in the Forum and declare dominion over the world. Rome's fall was not one moment. It was a long, slow collapse. Like watching a mountain erode grain by grain until only a shadow remains. And the siege of 455 CE was the moment the illusion was broken. After that, no one could pretend that the empire was eternal. The age of emperors was over. The age of warlords, kings, and feudal lords had begun. Rome's fall didn't just change Europe, it changed the entire trajectory of human history. The sack of 455 CE was not merely a military failure or a tragic loss of cultural artifacts, it was a civilizational turning point. It shattered the foundations of the known world and ushered in an age of fragmentation, instability, and cultural amnesia. The light of Rome did not vanish overnight, but it flickered and dimmed until only embers remained. In the absence of Roman authority, Europe splintered into a patchwork of competing barbarian kingdoms. These were not democracies or republics. They were warrior states built on blood, conquest, and power. Law and order became local, inconsistent, and brutal. The mighty infrastructure Rome had built, roads, aqueducts, and communication networks, fell into disuse or disrepair. Cities shrank or were abandoned altogether. The Western world entered what many would later call the Dark Ages, a time when literacy declined, science stalled, and warlords ruled. The centralized bureaucracies that had once enabled trade, taxation, and military defense vanished. Commerce slowed. Education collapsed. Art became a luxury for monasteries, and history was preserved only in fragments, whispered in Latin by monks copying old texts by candlelight. The psychological damage was perhaps even greater than the material loss. The idea of progress, so fundamental to Roman and Greek civilization, was replaced by fatalism and fear. The ancient belief in human advancement gave way to religious fatalism. People no longer asked, "How can we improve the world?" Instead, they asked, "How can we survive in it?" But not all was lost. The memory of Rome persisted like a ghost haunting the ruins. Its laws influenced later legal codes. Its architecture inspired cathedrals and castles. Its language latent lived on, transforming into the Romance languages of today. The Catholic Church, rooted in the vestiges of Roman bureaucracy, would rise as the dominant power in post-Roman Europe, preserving fragments of knowledge and offering spiritual continuity. Even the very idea of empire, of a unified Christian dominion stretching across Europe, would be reborn in later centuries. Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire would attempt to revive the dream of Rome. The Renaissance, over 1,000 years later, would rediscover Roman literature, philosophy, and art, reigniting the fire that had dimmed in the wake of Rome's fall. Yet no revival could ever truly recreate what was lost. What made the sack of 455 so significant was not just the destruction it caused, but the realization it forced upon the world. Nothing lasts forever, not even Rome. Empires fall, civilizations crumble, and when they do, the world doesn't pause, it reshapes itself. Rome's fire became Europe's forge. Out of the ashes, a new world would rise, different, darker, and eventually, destined to rebuild. But for centuries, people would walk among Rome's ruins, its crumbling columns, broken statues, and empty forums, and wonder, how could something so mighty fall? The sack of 455 didn't just answer that question, it made sure we would never forget it. Rome's death was not a moment, it was a lesson. The fall of the Eternal City stands not just as a chapter in a history book, but as a mirror for all civilizations. What we see in the flames of 455 CE is not simply the end of an ancient empire, it is the timeless cycle of human ambition, triumph, pride, and decay. Rome's greatness was built on discipline, law, innovation, and unity. But its downfall came from complacency, division, corruption, and arrogance. It is a pattern repeated again and again across time. Empires rise when people build together, and they fall when they forget why they began. The siege of Rome wasn't just the loss of gold or territory. It was the loss of certainty, the certainty that what we build will last forever, the certainty that power guarantees peace. In 455, that illusion died. And yet, even in its destruction, Rome left behind something powerful. Its ruins still stand. Its language still lives. Its ideas still echo through the halls of every modern court, university, and government. Rome burned, but its story survived. In a world still shaped by empire, still driven by ambition, still divided by power. The question remains, are we repeating Rome's mistakes? If history teaches us anything, it's this. Civilizations are not immortal. They are fragile, beautiful experiments always one fire away from fading into myth. We must remember, or we will repeat. If the story of Rome's final siege moved you, if it opened your eyes to the fragility of greatness and the lessons hidden in history's ashes, then let's explore more stories together. Subscribe to this channel for powerful cinematic journeys into the forgotten corners of the past. Dive into the rise and fall of civilizations, the untold truths of ancient empires, and the moments that shaped our modern world. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Like and share this video to help others discover the truth behind the myth. Comment below. What do you think is the greatest lesson from Rome's fall? Because history isn't just about what was, it's about what could be again. And as long as we remember, we can rebuild. The story doesn't end here. It's just beginning.